research in cardiovascular medicine and neurosciences, part-time working at JWM Neurology in Indianapolis, medical advisor to BMD Disability Review, a graduate of IU, went to Iowa for internal medicine, back to IU for neurology, where she remains a clinical assistant professor of neurology. She's an author, well published, with numerous clinical trials, and we welcome you, Dr. Frazer, to talk to us about understanding and building vaccine confidence during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to sharing this with you tonight. We're going to talk about vaccine confidence because it's so important. I'm going to give you a little bit of overview of what I'm going to talk about. There are a few slides I think that are going to be critically important to talk about. And then at the end, we'll definitely have time for questions. So first of all, I'd like to mention that we know vaccines have enormous public health importance. And we know that some of the hesitancy, some of the lack of confidence in this country and other developed countries is really one of privilege, because we don't necessarily see those diseases that have been vaccine preventable. And so people are now beginning to think, well, it's an option to take the MMR vaccine. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why we've come to the point we've come to and the seriousness, the gravity of the situation. Before the pandemic, so this was last year, the WHO put vaccine hesitancy is in the top 10 threats to global health. Because even though we live in the United States, we hear about it in the United States so often, it's actually a worldwide problem in developed countries. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Vaccine attitudes are really on a continuum. There are the acceptors, and then there are complete rejectors, which thankfully are a relatively small percentage, maybe 10% or less, maybe along the lines of 5%. But there are a number of people in the middle that we can reach as healthcare providers. Those people who are either vaccine hesitant and want more information, or they're the late vaccinators. And those are primarily parents who with very small children, and they're concerned about the number of vaccines they might receive at once. But they're often very willing to talk about vaccines with their healthcare provider. And once they hear confidence from their healthcare provider, they're often willing to go ahead. There are factors that undermine confidence, and there are factors that promote confidence. And we're going to talk about the undermining first. So why is it? A lot of it's misinformation, and we're well aware of that. There's a small percentage where it's a cultural issue and a belief system issue. And some of the best examples of that are in some of the measles outbreaks we've had over the last few years. So one of the big ones happened in late 2018 into early 2019 in New York City. And that was a measles outbreak based on someone who returned from Israel into an Orthodox Jewish community where they do have a cultural belief system against vaccination. And they had roughly 700, 800 cases blossom within a week's period of time, because measles is very, very contagious. So there are the cultural issues, but what we're dealing with right now really is almost a pandemic of misinformation. And then there is some low level of trust in vaccines, or whether vaccines even work. And then we also have that concern in this country of the fact that there's not much risk to have any of the vaccine preventable diseases. We don't remember what those are. We don't remember what they look like anymore. So how do we promote confidence, transparency, the rules and regulations and guidelines, which we're going to talk about, that really have safe vaccines, and then the collaborative kinds of things that we can do as HCPs. The word is confidence now. So the CDC has moved away from hesitancy, which seems negative, and more toward confidence, which is positive, and hoping that healthcare providers can really demonstrate the confidence. And this becomes important. And the reason it becomes important is there was a survey done last month, or at late September, where they looked at healthcare providers on whether or not they would get the COVID vaccine. And 47% of nurses said they would not get the COVID vaccine should it become available. And about 30% of physicians said the same. So that's very, very concerning. And we need to begin with step one, which is helping healthcare providers feel more comfortable and confident so that they can help their patients feel the same way. It is critical to maintain vaccine coverage rates, because even if we come out with an efficacious and safe vaccine, if we have an inadequate number of people willing to get the vaccine, then it's not going to be able to help us. I think the other thing we have to keep in mind is, going back to that misinformation portion of the discussion, we need to think about the fact that a lot of communication today comes about horizontally. It's far less delivered in a hierarchy. So people are less and less likely to listen to the scientific and medical communities, unfortunately. So where are people getting their information? Well, if you think about it, if you think about search terms, how you put something in Google, or how you search for something in Twitter or your Facebook, whatever your social media happens to be, say you put in vaccine adverse events and you find information on that. Every time you put in vaccine, the first things that are going to come up over time will be negative. So that feeds your bias. Our search terms will feed our own bias unless we're very careful. The other thing is that like-minded communities are easy to self-organize in the internet. Very, very easy. So they share their beliefs, they share their ideologies well beyond their local geographies. And again, they begin to confirm their own biases. They are speaking, they're essentially preaching to the choir. So I'd like to stop a minute and talk about what is herd immunity. And I think that there are some people who are looking at the enormous exponential rates in the pandemic, and they're thinking, well, we're going to achieve herd immunity very quickly, and nothing could be farther from the truth. We are still dealing with very small percentage of cases when you're thinking about worldwide community, and we don't know how long immunity lasts. So if you look in the top left and we look at the naive population, and we talk about an R naught. What is an R naught? An R naught is really a measure of infectivity. So if you look at this herd, this naive population example, you have an R naught of 4, because the infected person can transmit the disease to 4 people, who can in turn transmit the disease to 4 people. And if no one is protected in that community, you can see how quickly the caseload can go up. Very similar to the measles example I gave in New York City. If you look at the bottom left, where you have 70% of the population immune, and you still have the same R naught of 4, you have a much less successful transmission, because you have planted people who are immune to the disease. So in this particular case, this individual in the first block could only transmit to 1 individual and was unsuccessful the second time around. If you look in the right upper quadrant, that shows you the general relationship between R naught and the herd immunity threshold. So the more infective the organism, the higher the herd immunity threshold needs to be. And the lower right-hand corner gives you that demonstration for B with real life examples. So again, R naught is on the x-axis. As you move across the x-axis, these infectious diseases become more and more infectious. So therefore, on the y-axis, the herd immunity threshold needs to be greater and greater and greater. So if you look at measles, you need to have 95% of the population immune. And the other comment that I always make about herd immunity when I'm talking to patients too is, we don't really have examples of infectious diseases where natural herd immunity took care of the disease. That's not true in polio. That's not true in smallpox. That's not true in measles. That's not true in rubella. The only way we have achieved control over these infectious diseases is through vaccination. That's the way it has been done. So I think that's an important concept for people to understand, that herd immunity is generally not achieved through natural means. So I think that's very important as we talk about COVID-19 and we talk about vaccination. And even when we talk about flu vaccine. Flu vaccine is often considered a little bit differently from other vaccines. It's more considered a nice to have rather than a need to have, unless you happen to be a healthcare provider in which it's required. And there's a little bit less confidence in the flu vaccine. A lot of times it's because of misconceptions about its effectiveness. And part of that's been driven by those years in which the anticipatory flu strain was not actually the flu strain that was really seen in real life. So, you know, your flu vaccines are 3 or 4 strains. If they happen to miss the target on which strain it's going to be for any given year, then you might not be as effective, although it's not totally ineffective. And then we all know patients who say, well, I got the flu from the flu vaccine, and they're probably talking about some vaccine reactogenicity types of symptoms rather than the actual disease. But there are also racial, ethnic, and geographic disparities as well. The concern we have, though, is that flu vaccination trends could inform COVID-19 vaccination acceptance. So what about the variation in views? And this particular survey was done in September, and it's interesting because another survey was done that was actually alluded to by the CDC today last week after we came out with our initial vaccine efficacy results. And it went from a low of 45-ish% to 50% to last week where greater than 70% of the people, 72% I believe, are planning on getting vaccinated, but we'll see what actually happens. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see those individuals based on demographics who plan to get vaccinated. So people who are over age 60 plan on getting vaccinated. People who are white. People who know someone in the family who is immunocompromised or has been ill with COVID or know someone who has died from COVID. Those are individuals who are more likely to get vaccinated. But there is a healthy percentage of individuals who do not plan on getting vaccinated. And the biggest concern, of course, is the minority population. And in the minority population, the outcomes are worse. And it's often the minority population that are essential workers who cannot safely socially distance and cannot work from home. All of those individuals who are actually high up in the tiering for getting vaccine when it becomes available. Well, if you look at the reasons why, and we look at those that for the reasons why they would not get a vaccine first, there are people that are concerned about side effects, certainly. There are a lot of people, however, who don't think either vaccines work very well, or they don't think that the coronavirus outbreak is serious, or they think it's a government conspiracy, or it's a conspiracy with vaccine makers and the government. There are very few who say that it's because they don't have time to become vaccinated. Usually it's because they're either not concerned about the disease state itself, or they're concerned about adverse events, they're concerned about safety. And I think the safety message is very, very important. We're going to talk about that in a minute. People who would get the vaccine are people that want to protect themselves. They want to get the economy back the way it was. They want to be able to do the things they used to be able to do quicker. So they want a vaccine. They want to protect the community. They want to protect their family. And so it's sometimes an altruistic reason why. If you think about recent infectious disease outbreaks, there has also been some concern about that has fed over to SARS-CoV-2. So H1N1 vaccine largely became available after the pandemic peaked. And when the distribution arms did go out, they were a little bit faulty. So the vaccine did not reach everybody it needed to reach. SARS-CoV-1 and Zika ended before vaccine development was complete, although both of those outbreaks have helped us during this current pandemic in terms of vaccine development. I think people in this country forget about Ebola. The Ebola vaccine was developed and it is still available and is still being used in a targeted way. So when they see Ebola in certain cases in sub-Saharan Africa, what they're doing is targeted immunization. So they're targeting all the contacts around somebody who's actually positive for Ebola. So people in this country don't even think about that. But SARS-CoV-2 is a very, very different situation for SARS-CoV-1. It is much more infectious, and there are many, many more asymptomatic carriers. I try to tell people that the difference between SARS-CoV-1 and SARS-CoV-2 is that in SARS-CoV-1, that virus immediately dropped deep into the upper respiratory tract. So people were not carrying it around in their nasopharynx. It was in their chest. They were sick very quickly. They were not asymptomatic carriers, very few asymptomatic carriers. People were sick and they stayed home. So they were already practicing social distancing because they didn't feel well. In SARS-CoV-2, you have a very large number of people that are asymptomatic carriers, maybe as many as 35% or so. And for those people in that asymptomatic stage, it's very much in the nasopharynx. It's very much easier. It's very easy to transmit. The key determinants of confidence you can see here, but healthcare provider confidence in vaccines and the ability to communicate may be the most important aspect we have. We have to be able to combat the information environment currently. And the social media for the anti-vaccination community is very well funded, and they make advertisements and they make docudramas and they make infomercials that are very compelling and very easy to understand. Unfortunately, the scientific community, when they counter those arguments, they look very scientific. They are above the 6th grade reading level where we really want information to lie, and they just don't read very well. They're not nearly as compelling as those individuals who like to spread misinformation. So we need to increase trust. And by increasing trust, that means understanding the safety parameters around these vaccines. So I'm going to talk in the next slide about what vaccine development looks like in the pandemic, why it looks different for typical vaccine manufacturers, and why we need to have good safety or good trust in the safety in this vaccine development. So the traditional paradigm, we're all aware of, it's been talked about, takes many, many years because it's done sequentially. It begins with R&D, it begins with the preclinical phase, and then it moves into phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3, and then ultimately licensure based on success in the previous phase. So you don't have vaccine makers and or the government putting all of their eggs in that one basket and developing everything at the same time. So I always stop and make this comment too. Pandemic preparedness actually began in the Bush administration. It began around SARS-CoV-1 time. So the pandemic preparedness teams began with government support and working with the CDC, trying to take a look at how do we develop vaccines much more quickly than we have in the past. And how do you do that? You do everything at the same time, just about. And I think the important thing is if you look at traditional vaccine development, it can take anywhere from 30,000 to 60,000 subjects to achieve safety. For this particular purpose, in our clinical trials, we had 44,000 people in our initial phase 1, 2, and 3 studies. The difference in doing it over years is we did it all at once, at risk. So we have quite a bit of investment in our programming thus far. In addition, if you take a look at the very bottom, large-scale manufacturing started all the way back in phase 2 and has been ongoing. And as you know, we've filed as of Friday for emergency use authorization, and later on we'll be filing for the biologics license. So that licensure will take place a bit later, but the emergency use authorization comes from a condensation of all of these clinical trials. All of these phases have been done simultaneously. None of them have been left out. And the FDA had requested about 6 weeks ago that we submit 2 months worth of safety information on our subjects, which is why it took a little bit longer, which is why we had to wait for that safety information to be given to the FDA last week, which it was, which then subsequently triggered the evaluation for the EUA. But everything was as it should be. No safety measures were left unturned. And I think that's important to express to patients. I think the terminology, the nomenclature, Operation Warp Speed, might have been alarming to people, thinking that perhaps safety measures were not being considered, but they were. The other thing that has been very important is where to put the clinical trials. You really want clinical trials in areas where there's a lot of disease. And in part, that's to help measure vaccine efficacy. So I think if you think about our vaccine trials for a moment, we had phase 1 immunogenicity data published in the New England Journal of Medicine a couple of months ago. So that was information that every vaccine manufacturer had to take a look at. And what they were looking at was trying to produce as much antibody with their own vaccine as is equivalent to human serum convalescent antibody titers. So in our case, we had a certain number of subjects who had recovered for their COVID disease. We took a look at their human serum convalescent antibody titers and tried to match that with our vaccine, which we did and surpassed that. Other companies did the same thing. And then we also looked at T and B cell immunity studies and subset data. But while we can look at that immunogenicity data, that does not necessarily give a correlate of protection and allow us to make the leap toward vaccine efficacy. How do you measure vaccine efficacy? Well, you take a look at the placebo group and you take a look at the vaccine group, and you hope for a certain number of cases in the placebo arm that will be many, many more than what's true in the treatment arm. So that's how you make that comparison. So if you say you had 100 cases in the placebo arm and only, we'll say 10 or 20 cases in the vaccine arm, then you would know that you have a certain degree of vaccine efficacy. And that's very, very important. So we needed to wait to compile those cases. So we had a large number of sites in South America, for example, where they were having a lot of, almost an exponential increase for a while in COVID. And then in certain areas of the country, you also wanted to put some of your clinical trial sites in areas where you hoped for minority recruitment. I think the other thing to keep in mind when you talk about safety is way back in June, the FDA came out with a guidance for industry specific to COVID-19 that really, really delineated well the safety measures that were required of all of industry. And I also think that the important and very instructive element is how many agencies are associated with the FDA and taking a look at safety. It's not the FDA by itself by any means. And one of the very important groups are the Center for Biologics. The Center for Biologics take a look at vaccines, but they also take a look at biosimilars and other biologics, the biologics that are used in those diseases, such as rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis, for example. What is an emergency use authorization? I think that there's maybe some confusion about what that means. So it can be utilized when there is a declared public health emergency, such as true with COVID-19. It is a true public health emergency, contrary to what maybe a small subset of people within the country might believe. Then it's all about analyzing benefit risk. So it can be used, unapproved medical products can be used when there are no acceptable approved alternatives, and there are not in this case, at least not from a preventative space. There are some treatments that have had EUA, as we all know, for those individuals who are ill with COVID, but nothing in the preventative space. And then the FDA needs to take a look at benefit risk. So you have to decide, is this a life-threatening disease? Potentially, and it is. We're all aware of death rates associated with COVID-19. So do the benefits of this product outweigh the risks, even accepting the fact that there could very well be unknown risks? And in addition to the efficacy and safety information that we submit relative to the vaccine, we also have to submit manufacturing information. So our manufacturing sites and our manufacturing data must be analyzed as well. So the FDA has a period of time to review this. And after they review this, if they approve it, then it goes to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, the ACIP, for their final determination. And the ACIP has about 48 hours after the FDA might approve the EUA. I often am asked, and I'm going to say this up front, I'm often asked, well, do you have any written paperwork, anything about your vaccine or vaccination in general for COVID that I can give to my patients? And the answer is no. The CDC has it, the FDA has it, it's ready to go, but it cannot be disseminated until the EUA is approved. So all of that will be released at once, but there will be a lot of written material that will help you from the standpoint of understanding the vaccine itself, understanding how it's going to be delivered and delineated, and it's going to be written in patient appropriate formatting. Safety is going to be a continued priority. Safety data will continue to be monitored as it always has been. The current monitoring system like VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Response System, will be active and ongoing as it is for all vaccines. It's a continuous process. And there will be some other additional safety measures specific to COVID-19, which I'll talk about in a minute. And again, we have guidance on how we submit and continue to submit our adverse events. And we will be following our subjects that are in initial clinical trials out for a 2-year period of time. A great deal of pharmacovigilance is ongoing. People have asked about pregnancy and breastfeeding quite often. We do not have pregnancy and breastfeeding data. There has been a lot of discussion about that in the ACIP meetings and the CDC. As of now, it's going to be a pregnancy exposure registry that is collecting information. There is not a clinical trial in which pregnant women are deliberately being enrolled in our clinical studies. I think you know that we have had some changes to our original inclusion-exclusion criteria from the beginning of phase 3, which started July 27th. So we initially dropped the age down to 16, and we also allowed individuals who had HIV, hepatitis C, who were adequately controlled in our studies. And then more recently, about a month ago or so, we dropped our trials down to 12. The FDA asked us to capture about 200 children between the ages of 12 to 15 and analyze vaccine related efficacy and safety data. So that has been done. They have all been enrolled, and that data collection is ongoing. And pediatric studies will be forthcoming as well, but that will be a little bit more discussion with regulatory bodies at the FDA on how to do that safely and appropriately. So there are many, many partners working together to develop and implement the vaccination. And I think that's another thing that's very, very important for patients to understand. For our purposes and to understand a little bit about our vaccine and things that are in the public domain, things for you to understand is, yes, it is true. Pfizer is delivering their own vaccine. We are doing the delivery from manufacturing site to distribution site. The distribution sites have been determined by each state Department of Health in conjunction with the CDC and HHS. And the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine have been helping in terms of tiering who is going to receive vaccine in process. So who receives it first, tier 1, 2, 3, and so on. So that gives you a little bit of idea. So every state Department of Health had to put together their own plan, submit it to the CDC about 3 or 4 weeks ago. That was deciding where their sites were going to be in their state and how much vaccine they thought they needed. And then there was going to be discussion with the CDC, the HHS, and then the state departments of health to finalize those plans. So Pfizer is not going to decide where to distribute or how much to distribute. We are doing it at the direction of the CDC and HHS. And that is something we've had to explain a number of times. As of right now, this week, 10 sites in the United States, 1 site in Indiana, is getting a dummy distribution from Pfizer. It's going to be our thermal shipper so that they can see what it looks like and learn how to operate it. There will be no vaccine in that thermal shipper. That's another thing I think people don't understand. They think that the vaccine is going to be shipped right now. It's not going to be shipped right now. The EUA has to be approved first before a vaccine can be shipped. The other thing I think that needs to be addressed here is that all of the ancillary supplies, so the normal saline for reconstitution, the syringes and needles, and some degree of PPE is being supplied through the Department of Defense through their contractor McKesson. They will be delivering everything else. We are delivering the vaccine. And those will come together. Hopefully the ancillary supplies may come a little bit before the vaccine, but at least at the same time as the vaccine. So that gives everybody an idea of what the distribution network is looking like. We are responsible for the cold chain distribution of our vaccine, and that is coming with the thermal shipper. I think people might have been familiar with the fact that in September, there was a lot of concern about the politicalization of vaccine development for COVID-19. So 9 of the CEOs from all the companies making COVID-19 vaccine, at least involvement in COVID-19 vaccination production in the United States, came together to sign a document saying that our safety was going to be managed scientifically, and there was not going to be any additional push other than that to try to get a safe and efficacious vaccine out there. There was no political pressure, in other words. And I think we need to look at the fact that we are hoping that we'll have maybe 4 vaccines available by the end of the first quarter of 2021. We're hoping that there will be a Pfizer vaccine and a Moderna vaccine and an AstraZeneca vaccine and a J&J vaccine, a Janssen vaccine by that time, because there's no way we're going to be able to vaccinate the entire world with any one company. Similar to our flu vaccines, which are made by multiple companies to be delivered worldwide. I want to say one more comment about this, and this was talked about a lot today in the CDC meeting, and that is the overarching objective of vaccine allocation is to try to reduce the impact on health. So who are going to be the first people to receive vaccine? Frontline healthcare workers. They're going to be first. There's a lot of discussion about who might be second and what does frontline healthcare worker really mean? Does it mean every healthcare worker? Does it mean people in the emergency departments, intensive care units, people who do aerosolizing procedures, people who are in ambulances? What does that mean? That a lot of that was discussed today. The other thing that was discussed is, do we do essential healthcare workers before those with immunocompromising conditions? Do we do everybody in a long-term care environment, both the personnel as well as the inhabitants at the same time? Or if vaccine is in relatively short supply, do we only do the healthcare workers because they're at greater risk of infecting the people who live within long-term care? And then do those who live in long-term care, do we do them later? But logistically, it would make sense to do everybody at once. If you're already in a healthcare in a long-term care facility, shouldn't you do everybody at once? That was some of the discussion today. I think the important thing to keep in mind is what you say really matters. People really do listen to their healthcare provider. That is the best predictor of whether somebody is going to get vaccinated. If you just make a suggestion, well, I think you might want to consider it, people won't consider it that strongly. And I always talk to healthcare providers about this very thing. When somebody has diabetes, you don't say, gosh, I really wish you would use your insulin. No, you don't do that. You spell out what they need to do. We need to be considering vaccine utilization the same way. There's a lot of messaging here, and we're certainly not going to go through all of them, but probably the most important thing is to be positive. Don't try to bring up myths or repeat any anti-vaccination arguments. Try to stay positive, stay on the side of science, and very soon, hopefully, you'll have visual aids provided by the CDC that will be helpful. So this is my summary slide. I'm going to go through a few areas where you can get some additional information about this, but confidence is key for all vaccines. And I'm well aware of the fact that there are a lot of misperceptions out there. One of them I didn't share earlier that I'm going to share now is that I was part of a call in the United Kingdom at one point, and there was a nurse vaccinator who said that one of the rampant misinformations that goes around there is that getting the measles confers additional intelligence points for your children. So we've heard about measles parties in the United States. In the United Kingdom, they had measles parties in an effort to make their children smarter. And of course, we all know nothing could be farther than the truth. And as a neurologist, certainly measles encephalitis does not confer any kind of IQ benefit. These are some selected sources. I strongly encourage people to look at the Immunization Action Coalition because they have a lot of free information they will mail to you for your office that talks about the importance of immunization that is perfect for the 6th grade level. If you are interested in up-to-the-day information about our vaccine, if you go to www.pfizer.com, that will give you a host of information, including how many subjects have received both doses of the vaccine, what our current minority enrollment is, where our sites might be, where our future research might be going. All of those things will be available right there, as well as basics about what messenger RNA really is. How do you make that vaccine? What does it do in the body, kind of thing, is all on that site. I mentioned that there's a number of ways that we are going to be monitoring vaccine safety. Much of it has been ongoing for years. Some of it is more specific to COVID. The VA has an electronic health record monitoring system that they're going to be using. And there is another one, which I'll touch on in a minute, that's going to be looking at the essential workers who are vaccinated for COVID-19. There will be the vaccine adverse event reporting system, taking a look at those adverse events of special interest, particularly the later types of vaccine enhanced adverse events. That's going to be captured and continue to be captured as well. There is even that kind of data that can be captured specific to long-term care facilities. And I think that's important to bring up individually, that all of those individuals who are at great risk for developing COVID-19, and they are going to be at a higher tiering system, they are going to be specifically monitored and followed. And finally, what about the essential workers? Well, the plan is right now from the CDC and FDA to monitor through smartphones 20 million people for their first and second vaccinations, because all but one vaccination that's currently closest to potential release are 2 vaccination series, their initial vaccine plus a booster. So 20 million people during the first few months of a vaccination program to monitor them on a daily basis, first week post-vaccine, for reactogenicity types of side effects, and then weekly thereafter for 6 weeks. It's very similar for those of you who had COVID. I was one of them. The State Department of Health in Indiana monitored me on a daily basis for 2 weeks via text messaging about all of the symptoms that I was experiencing. Very similar programming to this process here. Of course, that data is only as good as whether or not the individual is willing to put that data in. We can certainly recognize that, but that is an important methodology in which we can monitor safety. And Joel, I'm stopping here. This is my last slide, so I am very happy to address any questions that might have come up.
All right, we do have some in the chat. I believe Dr. Steinecker was going to read these.
Yes.
If you don't mind.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So first question is vaccination indicated for patients who have already had antibody-proven COVID?
Well, that's a great question because that came up in the call for the CDC too. And the decision was, yes, they should, because we do not know how long immunity lasts after natural infection. And we also don't know whether it's as good as the vaccine-related immunity. And I can tell you from our own clinical trials, when subjects came in, They received a nasopharyngeal swab, they received blood work to look for antibody positivity, and they got their vaccination. So there was no waiting to see whether or not they had COVID or had COVID, they were vaccinated. Now that data is being looked at separately in secondary analyses. So we're going to be looking to see what happens to those people who've had COVID and their immunogenicity response. We're going to take a look at that, which I think will be very instructive. But we did not eliminate those people from our vaccination trial. So I think that's very important information to keep in mind. But the CDC deliberated on that, and we'll see what their final recommendations are. And they went back and forth about the fact that, well, if vaccination number, if the vaccine allocation, if the resource numbers are in short supply, then maybe we should eliminate those individuals who've already had disease. But there's a large percentage of people who were asymptomatic, and we don't know whether they've ever had disease or not, and we're not going to be able to antibody test everybody. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, but I think ultimately the decision will be vaccinate everyone, whether or not you had COVID or not. And again, we're kind of looking at this as a long-term problem. If we look at COVID like we do flu, then people are going to need potentially a booster shot on a yearly basis. That's all potential. We don't know the answers to that yet, but that is definitely a consideration. Great question.
So along those same lines, there's been reports of folks who are deficient in interferon gamma type 1 and are unable to mount an effective antibody response due to lack of signaling to viral infection. Does this method of vaccine allow immunization of that small number of men with this X-based abnormal chromosome?
Well, that's a great question, which we don't have the information for that yet. So we excluded from our trials people with immunocompromising states, at least for now. So in our initial phase 1 through 3, with the exception of the HIV and individuals who had chronic hepatitis C, we did not allow people, for example, who were taking cytotoxic agents for their disease state, or people taking systemic corticosteroids, or people who had inherent immunocompromising status from their disease processes. So those people were excluded. I can tell you from a messenger RNA platform, what does that look like? Messenger RNA is delivered via lipid nanoparticles. It is taken up by muscle cells. It's eventually presented to the immune system through dendritic cells. Messenger RNA stays within the cytosol. It never goes into the nucleus. It's never incorporated into your own cellular DNA, which I think is important for those people who are concerned that these vaccines are going to somehow take over their bodies. That's not the case. And so these cells, through the cytosol, are manufacturing spike protein antigens, which are then presented on their cells. But messenger RNA doesn't last very long, even with lipid nanoparticles. So we don't have, that again was a long-winded answer to say we don't know, but it does, but the mechanism of messenger RNA vaccine is very different from mechanisms of action of other viral vector related vaccines from the past. So we don't know.
The next question involves adjuvants. To my knowledge, neither of the messenger RNA vaccines contain aluminum adjuvants. And then there was some additional discussion that a vaccine contains less than a milligram of aluminum anyway, and we eat 7 to 9 milligrams a day. Any additional comment?
Yes. So in short, we don't have aluminum. That's true. Our vaccine is preservative free, which is also plays into the shipping and handling of the vaccine. Ours are preservative free. I can't speak to Moderna's because I don't know, but ours are preservative free. In the vaccine vial, there's 0.45 milliliters of liquid. It's messenger RNA and the lipid nanoparticle, a little bit of sucrose and a little bit of normal saline. That's it. That's what's in our vaccine. from an aluminum perspective, it is used as an adjuvant, and it's a very effective adjuvant. And we don't begin to get through vaccine any concerning levels of aluminum, nowhere close. So that's not the reason we didn't use aluminum, wasn't that concern. However, we don't have it in our vaccine. We also don't have anything that might be known to be allergy producing.
Okay. Um, there's been a lot of conversation in the media about the culling of mink and 200 and some people who've acquired mink-related COVID. What risk does that pose to the antibody created by this vaccine that would be an S spike neutralizing antibody?
Well, and that's a very good question. And I think we've all read a little bit about that. We've taken a look at the MMWR came out with some information about what was happening in Denmark with their mink farms. The one positive about, well, there are many positives about messenger RNA vaccine development, but one of the positives is that even if the virus mutates, it's very easy and a very quick process to make changes in your messenger RNA at the development site to produce vaccine that will work for those if there's a major change in the mutation. We all know viruses mutate. This virus has been relatively stable as viruses go. It has definitely mutated, but not as often maybe as some other viruses. It's had one very specific mutation that has been substantial, and that mutation has allowed COVID to be more contagious. It has not conferred a greater lethality, thank heavens, but it has made it more contagious. But even with that change in the spike protein, that did not alter our vaccine development program, nor do I believe it altered the Moderna program. So again, a long-winded answer to say that you can see mutations in animals, and this is a zoonotic virus. It's going to jump back and forth between different animal species and humans, and there may be changes in the virus, and that is something to keep in mind. But the advantage of this platform is that it is easy to make changes based upon significant changes significant mutations in the COVID virus.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? If you could put those in the chat.
I think we're a small enough group. If someone wants to unmute themselves to ask a question, feel free to.
I do find it interesting that with the development of the S spike, which is what our immune system is asked to do, we then subsequently see that full S spike. It would seem that we don't develop an antibody to one epitope, but would have the whole S spike where we would have many antibodies develop against different epitopes, some which are effective at blocking and some which are not. Do we have any rough idea how many different epitopes there are to which we develop antibody?
Well, Scott, that's a great question. We may, but I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, no problem. Just curious.
Well, and
Dr. Pond looks like he might have a question.
Well, one other quick comment, Scott. There was vaccine development looking only at the receptor binding portion of the spike protein. And that may not be enough. And the other interesting thing about the spike protein is it operates on a hinge. So it can open and close. And that makes some difference in terms of how easily the virus can infect a cell. When the hinge is open, it infects a cell easier than when it's closed.
Dr. Pond, you're muted, but if you have a question, the floor is yours, sir.
Oh, I really don't have a question. I think it's been a great presentation, been very, very helpful.
Yes, and we thank Dr. Frazer so much for her time this evening and the wonderful content. Last call for questions, anyone? Or another slide to reference or anything like that, let us know.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity for you to present to us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the audience. I know everybody would probably rather be doing something else this evening, so thank you.
Wait a minute, I do have one question. So if you get the vaccine or if you have antibody proven COVID and you've got a response, you still need to wear a mask?
Yes. 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 You know, that's so funny because that came up with the CDC call today too. And that was, the question was, should we still all be wearing masks even though we are immunizing? Yes. 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 You still want to wear a mask. You still want to wear a mask.
Yeah, there's a lot of social context around that we had some discussion within our HR department. Uh, you know, one of those admonitions of Jesus not to eat the meat from the idols, even if you don't believe in the idol, it may cause your neighbor to fall. Well, this is sort of the same deal. We probably will reach a tipping point. I'm going to project in August or September where enough of the population has been vaccinated and has the opportunity that we'll start to see relaxation. But it'll be interesting to see as a society whether or not we actually recognize the huge benefit in the depression of RSV, influenza, human metapneumovirus, and even enterovirus, that it might be socially much more acceptable to protect ourselves and each other from these other viruses, not just COVID, that we continue to mask and social distance far off into the future.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. We appreciate that. Thank you to Dr. Steinecker for hosting, and thank you to Dr. Frazer for the wonderful information this evening. Now, just one last plug. Our next webinar is Friday at noon, December 4th, Friday, which is a Friday at noon, and you have to register through the ISMA. So with that, I will sign off this evening, and thanks again to Dr. Frazer for the wonderful information. And thanks to all our members who took the time to be informed on this vital subject. So good evening until we meet again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.